for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We have a fabulous panel for everyone. We're going to cover a lot of the United States. We're going to talk about international developments and, of course, the possibility of some reform on Capitol Hill. What I want to do is kick off the conversation with our first two panelists, Karen O'Keefe, Director of State Policies at Marijuana Policy Project, and Matt Lamers, International Editor at MJBizDaily. So welcome, Karen and Matt.
Thanks so much for having us on.
So Karen, what I want to do is I want to kick off this conversation talking about the outlook for potential legalization, full-on adult use in various states across the country. And of course, we want to definitely pay attention to developments on the medical side, because obviously, once a state does go medical, it does create a pathway to legalization. So Karen, maybe just give me your outlook on kind of what states are potentially in play, and maybe do some handicapping for us on, maybe some odds of getting things done in various parts of the country. And as we talk, I may jump in and ask some questions.
Sounds great. So in 2024, the states that I think are most likely to legalize for all adults are Hawaii, New Hampshire, Florida, and South Dakota. And then the three states that might take a little bit longer, but could perhaps surprise us, are Pennsylvania, Louisiana, and West Virginia. And then we also have Virginia that's in this weird space where it's kind of half legal, where it's legal to possess, legal to grow, but there's no regulated sales. And there's a chance that Virginia could finish the job. They have a new legislature with a Democratic majority that looks to get it done, but the governor is not interested. So it remains to be seen if he would veto a bill if it lands on his desk, or do a mandatory veto of it.
Let's talk about the first four that you listed. Maybe just give us a couple of nuances in these various marketplaces, because there's a lot of different things going on. We have a ballot initiative in Florida. We've had legislatures that have passed legalization before, but it has not gotten it over the finish line. And then we also have, some other ones that don't fit in either of those boxes.
Sure. So the first two states, Hawaii and New Hampshire, are both states with no ballot initiative process. The only way to legalize is through the legislature. Hawaii is the only state left with a Democratic trifecta. The House, the Senate, and the governor are all Democratic that has not legalized. So it's kind of the only low-hanging fruit left, I would say. The Senate there passed legalization twice, including last year. The House hasn't even held hearings on it. The governor's kind of tepidly supportive. There, the House has long said that the Senate sends it half-baked bills that aren't fully fleshed out. Well, that's changed this year. The Attorney General, who used to be just completely opposed, that office now drafted a 300-page bill that has a lot of details, a lot of which we don't like, but at least the House has a vehicle that's fully fleshed out to start with, and we're pushing to make sure that a lot of this kind of recriminalization of innocuous conduct, per se DUI, things like that aren't included. But there is a starting point. It's not going to be that easy in the House, but there's a very real chance that at long last they could hold hearings, they could pass a bill, and that it could join, the entire West Coast and more than half of the country.
Yeah, because one of the big holding points really in Hawaii really is just getting the hearing, right? Because we just have not seen that yet, despite that Democratic trifecta.
Definitely. Getting a hearing is important, and then getting a vote. And there's a very arduous committee process that moves quick with a lot of deadlines and a lot of details that have to be sorted out in a short time frame that also makes it challenging.
Let's talk about Florida. Obviously, we're all looking at Florida. It is a gigantic marketplace, one of the largest populations in the United States. The Supreme Court is kind of weighing this ballot language, right? So kind of to walk us through where we're at right now. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, we need a supermajority for passage in Florida, which again is another rarity, and obviously, a higher bar to pass.
Definitely. So we've seen this with a lot of initiatives lately that there are legal challenges in a lot of initiatives once they're filed. So the Supreme Court they've already collected the signatures. It's ready to be on the ballot, except there's this challenge on the legal language. The court has already heard the arguments, the state Supreme Court, and we're just waiting on a ruling to see if it actually makes the ballot. If it does, we would need a 60% supermajority on the election. There was just a poll from the Chamber of Commerce showing it just below it. The Chamber's opposed. We don't know how it's worded. Other polls show it a little bit above 60%. So there's a big question if it makes it to the ballot at all. And that initiative would essentially just change the medical program so all the medical businesses could also serve to adult use consumers, and then the legislature could authorize additional businesses as well.
Yeah, we've kind of seen this structure also play out. I'm thinking about Missouri, I'm thinking about Maryland, where once you go rec, the first mover advantage is essentially to the operators that are up and running in that state. And a lot of times, getting other operators into the fold has proved to be pretty challenging, either by, the law itself or just, various operating challenges that we've kind of seen nationwide.
Definitely. In some of the states where there's a focus on social equity, there's a fee for the existing operators that can fund startup, and then you have built-in new licensing that wasn't included in Florida. There's always the challenge, as I said, with initiatives that somebody might, challenge it for some single subject or other things that makes there be a need to keep it kind of tight.
Let's talk about kind of the medical landscape here, because, obviously this is kind of where it all begins in terms of opportunities. We've seen some med states, take years and years and years to finally go green, but without that first, legalization aspect in the med, we will never get to green. It's very difficult to go from, 0 to green. Especially with some of these states that don't even have ballot initiatives, they outlaw them outright. So maybe just kind of talk about, the medical outlook here.
Yeah, so I'd say 4 states are in serious play in 2024. None of them are slam dunks. South Carolina is one of those states there. The Senate passed legal medical cannabis a couple of years ago. Last year, it didn't even allow medical cannabis to get a vote. There were a lot of other legislative priorities. And in the Senate, you need a supermajority to put something on the calendar in most cases. The bill sponsor said that he's hoping for a Senate vote this year by February or so, and then we'd move to the House, where they've never had a vote before, and where, internally it's looking pretty good for at least 50-50, but there's always a question of, do you get a vote? Do you hold on to those votes? And so it's going to have to take, a lot of work to make sure that happens. It has a decent amount of market opportunities. Some of these new medical states are very, very limited. This would allow one, they call it a medical cannabis pharmacy, for every 10 real other pharmacies. That would be about 65 statewide, with a decent number of growers and processors as well. So that's South Carolina. Moving to North Carolina. There, the Senate has passed medical cannabis a couple of times. The House Speaker did internal polling in his Republican caucus. They did not have majority among the Republicans, and he said that meant they would not even give any hearing. He is running for Congress, so I've heard there might be either a new speaker or maybe, he'll soften up this year. If someone gave it a floor vote, I suspect it would pass in the House, and the governor's supportive. So that's also a possibility. Next up, we have Wisconsin, where the Republican Assembly Speaker has been saying he'd have a medical cannabis bill that would be highly restrictive. They finally came out with a proposal, and it has 5 state-run stores only and 1 processor. The Senate leader said that's dead and a rival in our chamber. We're not going to entertain. We want small government, not big government. So at the moment, the 2 chambers appear to be at an impasse. Hopefully they'll work it out. I have serious concerns about state-run stores. I think that's just not something that's likely to be operational, even if the feds aren't prosecuting people. There are so many reasons that states do not want to commit federal felonies on a daily basis. And I don't think it would ultimately bear fruit. So just waste a ton of money and a ton of time and then not be operational, I think. And the last state's Nebraska, where they have an initiative process. There is an amazing group of families that have gone at this 3 times. The first time, there was a single subject ruling that kicked it off the ballot after it passed. The second time, a major funder backed off while they were doing an initiative, and they came very close to getting the signatures they needed, but not quite. So this is hopefully the 3rd time's a charm. It's a very short, simple initiative. Because of that ridiculous single subject ruling, it had to be like the shortest initiative I've ever seen. And those are kind of the 4 states that are in play for medical cannabis this year.
It's kind of interesting, because what we've seen before in the past, when states go rec, it's often a trigger to their bordering states, because what we've seen is, border retail is such a huge component of business when you have these, vast kind of marijuana deserts. And it's just kind of amazing, being a Midwesterner, that Wisconsin is just, still putting their foot in the sand, despite, now we have, most of the Midwest is actually fully green. And then, I'm always just concerned about the overall kind of business opportunities in our country when it comes to marijuana, because We have, we need to see growth and legalization in red states in the South, because at some point our map is drying up, So just fantastic points, Karen.
Thanks so much. Yeah, we have a staffer who's based in Louisiana, has been spending a couple of years making inroads, making friends with firefighters and other unusual allies. And we definitely know that the low-hanging fruit are picked, and we need to make inroads in states that are more conservative as well.
And Karen, I think it's a good segue now to bring in our international editor, Matt Lamers. Matt, it's interesting because Canada obviously is entirely state-run. So I want to just talk to you kind of just on the dynamics happening internationally. Where is there business opportunities? Have you seen some dry up? Is there a lot of kind of pie in the sky type of talk, especially, when we've been waiting on some of these international markets to come and play, literally for years?
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Karen. That was really interesting, Karen, especially when you were talking about the possibility of state-owned stores in the U.S., because we have a bunch of those in Canada. Only in Quebec, though. Actually, there's some in New Brunswick as well. So it's an interesting dynamic when you go federally legal, and provinces or states do have the option to own parts of the supply chain, which some provinces in Canada have done that, but not all of them. So anyways, thanks, Chris. So yeah, I'm going to give a short kind of overview on the international medical cannabis market, kind of speaking broadly to where there's opportunities now and where there's not opportunities yet. Countries to watch this year for me, Colombia, Czech Republic, Germany, Spain, Mexico, Ukraine, Israel, and Canada. I should say countries to watch, and I'm watching those countries for new laws or new meaningful regulations, which would spell out potential business opportunities, or the opposite of that, actually. First, let's dispel some kind of myths and misunderstandings about international opportunities. A lot of people think you can import-export recreational cannabis or marijuana, but that's not really the case. International drug control treaties, which I'm sure all of your respective countries adhere to, won't allow or don't allow for import-export of recreational marijuana. This has to be changed at the international level, not just at the national level. So the INCB and the UN, and that takes a really long time, probably years or decades, because you have to change the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, which is very hard to do. So we're not talking hemp here. We're talking about medical marijuana, medical cannabis with THC. So your countries might also be parties to other bilateral or multilateral institutions that could have a say in this as well, such as the European Union. How that could affect you. So, for example, the executive body of the EU has slowed down significant cannabis legal reform across Europe in the past couple of years, in particular in Germany and in Luxembourg. And now it's looking like that's going to also happen in the Czech Republic. So those countries are taking meaningful advances forward in terms of regulatory and legal reform, but they're not quite establishing the full-fledged markets that we see in the US and in Canada. So go ahead.
Are we seeing any like pilot programs, Matt? Because I remember, I think you may have brought up maybe Luxembourg with a potential kind of cannabis cafe type of model. Is there any pilot programs kind of underway, soon to launch?
So yeah, great question. So like I said, the executive body of the European Union is not really allowing European Union countries to fully legalize cannabis. So what countries are doing instead is they're saying, okay, we're not going to legalize cannabis, but we're going to launch trial programs. And those some of them have business opportunities and some of them don't. France has a trial program on right now where they're giving away free cannabis, and it's hard to make a profit when you're giving away free stuff. So that's not really possible there. But it is a trial, and it's a meaningful advance forward. It's at least not a step backwards, right? So you also have trials going on in lots of places like Denmark, Ireland, and France. Like I said, they're happening at Germany. Instead of fully legalizing recreational marijuana, like was their original plan, they're going to instead have kind of like regional or municipal pilot programs cities are going to be able to regulate sales. The Netherlands just started their pilot program in 2 cities, and it's going to be expanded soon. But most of these pilot programs, aside from Germany, what they have in common is they're small and they're slow. So Netherlands was supposed to launch 3 years ago, and they just launched, for example.
And in these pilot programs, Matt, is it, what are they trying to prove if there is a market for marijuana? Is it about, are they trying to develop some type of structure for some retail regulated market? What is it that there are, is it about, building up your own, distribution logistics network here? I mean, what is the goal of some of these pilot programs, just generally speaking?
That's a really good question. So for some of them, the goal is simply they're doing the pilot program because that's all that they can do.
Okay.
Because the Executive Council of the European Union won't let them do full-fledged legalization. So that's
okay.
Then you have countries like Denmark who have had this. They've had a medical pilot program, for a number of years now, 4 years or so, 5 years, maybe longer. I'm not sure exactly. But so the point of that is to prove that they can manage from a regulatory and bureaucratic perspective the cannabis supply chain. Because for a lot of these people, like, this isn't going to surprise anyone, but a lot of countries and populations and bureaucrats are just coming out of the war on drugs, war on cannabis kind of thing that we've been stuck in for decades now, and they don't know how or if it will work. So a lot of people thought the Canadian cannabis legalization situation would be a failure, but it's been a success in my opinion, because you have the illicit market is on the retreat. Sales are rising meaningfully every month, though at a slower pace than they used to be, but that's normal.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and you're actually seeing,
I think a lot,
and you're actually seeing sales growth, and not only that, you're seeing, at least from some of the reporting that you've done, some of the other things that I've read, an incredibly high percentage of Canadians get their weed from the regulated market. I mean, really, really high.
69%, which is the government's estimate. In a survey they do every year, 69% of cannabis consumers who consumed in the past year said they only purchased legal cannabis. So that's a really meaningful number. But what that doesn't tell you, though, is quantity, right?
Sure.
So the other 31% could be purchasing 80% of the cannabis in the broader market. We don't know that. We're not really sure exactly how much cannabis is being bought and sold in the illicit market.
Yeah.
But it's an improvement. It's a meaningful improvement.
When you see these kind of international markets, I mean, do you see them taking a template like Canada and kind of, transfixing it to their economy and country, or do you think that there's going to be some type of newer marketplace per se?
We're talking medical or recreational?
I guess you can take either one, and then also where on the medical rec side, do you think this will all begin with med? Are we far away from rec?
We're far away from rec. It usually starts with I should say, well, yeah. I mean, there's only 2 countries that have legalized, so it usually starts with medical in those 2 countries.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it will start with medical in most places. Then it will move to rec. Who knows when that's going to happen? It could be years or decades, right? But what's interesting about medical models is they're so different from country to country when they're federally regulated. So Canada's medical model is unique in that the main channel in which it's distributed is via registered mail. So there are no or almost no legal medical storefronts in Canada. In Europe, it's very different from North America. It's much more pharmaceutical centered, and in many countries, it's distributed in pharmacies. So,
yeah, and we've kind of seen some states take that pharmacy model, a few of them, but of course, obviously, we have a huge disconnect because the medical industry in the United States really does not condone, if you go to your doctor, they're not going to recommend weed unless, you go to one of these, certain doctors just to get your med card, but it's just not in the healthcare system. It's just not built that way. We're not getting recs to go get weed. Unfortunately, we have, recs to go get other painkillers, things like that are highly addictive. That's another conversation for another day. But it is interesting, this pharmacy type of model, because then you really need the whole state to believe that this is truly medicine, which of course, all of us most of us believe that is the case.
Most of us believe that's the case. I believe that's the case. Yeah. And and some regulators do and some regulators don't in different countries. In Europe, they do. The ones that have legalized medical cannabis sales. And so it's treated it's viewed in a much more viewed through a much more pharmaceutical lens.
And then that kind of also shows out with the products, right? The product availability, perhaps like maybe more tablets, more pill driven, as opposed to, smokable.
Yeah, so the barriers to entry in those markets are higher because the standard of production is higher. In Europe, generally, if you're growing cannabis and then once you process it, you need to do it in a facility that's EU GMP certified, which is an expensive, lengthy certification that you get.
Well, Matt, I really appreciate you taking time. Hold on with your thoughts. We're going to bring everyone back for Q&A. I'm going to introduce our next two panelists. The first is going to be Carrie Hinkle, Director of Membership and Public Affairs at the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, and he'll be joined by Layli Fatehi, Partner and Principal of Blunt Strategies. Carrie and Layli, welcome aboard. Appreciate you taking out time and talking with us today.
Thanks so much.
Happy to
So
be here.
Carrie, I want to get this conversation kicked off and kind of just give us the state of the state of the hemp industry right now. Obviously, Congress is weighing the Farm Bill as they are required by law to do. Kind of walk us through, maybe just major developments in the hemp space, and I may, jump in and ask you some questions as we chat.
Yeah, in a word, craziness is how I would describe it, to be honest with you. So, we were expecting the Farm Bill to pass at the end of last year, and of course that's been extended now until September 30th. And any, person that's in politics will tell you it's not going to pass on September 30th, a month and a half before the election. So what we've heard is that we can anticipate the next version to pass during the lame duck session. So that's what we're aiming for now. As far as priorities for the industry, a few weeks ago, we released a hemp industry's priorities list on our website. And, as an organization, the Roundtable, we've been lobbying for hemp for over a decade now. And we worked with Senator McConnell on the 14 and 18 farm bills, and we're really involved in the language specific to hemp in those bills. And at those times, especially in 18, we were one of the few voices for the industry. Our members make up some of the largest hemp and CBD companies in the nation, and we have some cannabis companies as well. But, again, at the time in 18, we were one of the few voices. And now when we go to DC, when we're in offices and talking with staffers and whatnot, we might be the third interest from cannabis or hemp that they talk to that day. Right. So there's been a lot of noise and a lot more interest, a lot more special groups that have been popping up. So what we did at the beginning of January was with that priorities list was we united 33 different organizations across different states and some other national organizations to say these are the priorities of the hemp industry, and these are some of the things that we want to see get accomplished. So the idea there was bringing unity and leadership to Congress for the industry. Our top priority since the 18 Farm Bill has passed has been to regulate CBD as a dietary supplement. There's simple guardrails in place now.
And a dietary supplement, Carrie, essentially, you can buy it off the shelf, right?
Yeah, sure. So something like a turmeric or any other type of daily supplement that you might see in a grocery store. We've always thought CBD should be right along in those categories in a grocery store. There's been several bills that have been introduced over years now. The most current version is HR 1629. That's been led by Morgan Griffith from Virginia and Angie Craig out of Minnesota. And so there's been several bills. We believe there's a framework in place to regulate CBD, but along with those priorities, we have one to raise the THC in hemp in the field only. to 1%. We're not talking about finished product, but there's tons of farmers that might spike at 0.4, and you've heard stories of people having to burn hemp crops, and so that's one. Another one is to reduce regulations for hemp farmers. Right now, farmers got to go down and get a background check and get their fingerprint scanned. And I don't know if you ever met any farmers, but they usually don't want to go and do that, right? They're just more focused on their field. So that's one. And then there's laundry list, but the one that's most personal to me is HR 1428, and that's by Congresswoman Pingree from Maine and Congressman Trone from Maryland, and that would remove the felon ban that's currently in place. So when we were in the process of the negotiations of the last farm bill, there was a senator from a more conservative state that had actually put an amendment that would have banned CBD completely. And we used our voter voice portal. We got out to all of our email subscribers, and overnight there was like 25,000 emails that got sent to the Senate and the House offices. And, we're getting phone calls from staffers like, turn this off, you're crashing our systems. So that raised the voice and let them know that amendment was not going to be possible. But during the natural negotiation process, that senator put in a felon ban. So if you've been convicted of a felony in the last 10 years, you're not able to grow hemp right now. So that's one of the laundry list of priorities that we'd like to see pass in the next farm bill. So
and that's any type of felony?
Yeah, drug related, I believe.
Drug related, specifically for drug related.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an opposite tack that we've kind of seen play out, where we're trying to address the wrongs of the drug war in policy, and here we have the exact opposite of that happening. Let's talk about this farm bill. It's become such an influential and somewhat controversial topic these days, because on one hand, it really kind of opened up the gates for low dose hemp derived THC products, gave them federal protection that obviously does not exist for other types of THC products. We definitely do not want to, add more restrictions, right? So, I mean, talk about kind of, what some of these arguments can be once they finally, address this bill, which, is required by law to be, passed, every 5 years, I believe.
Yeah. And it's right now, the best way to describe it is a whack-a-mole situation, where every state is picking a different lane and avenue to regulate these products. I'm sitting here in Kentucky, and we've got a different model than Ohio and Minnesota. I'm sure that we'll talk about there too. So what we're anticipating is toothpaste out of the tube, cats out of the bag. We're not sure if they can rein in this market in the next farm bill. The definition of that involves hemp will most likely stay the same if we had to guess. So we'll see it as a state-by-state approach too. And there's an aspect of this, especially talking with more cannabis-focused companies, that they've have battled to make some of these products illegal or ban them or just only sell them through a particular dispensary retail channel. And most of the time they keep losing these battles. They keep saying, well, if Congress didn't intend to legalize these products, then Congress needs to go back and change it. So in the talks we've had with some of the largest MSOs and large cannabis companies, some of them are starting to embrace it and understand it. Hey, you can ship this across state lines. It's got a more friendly tax structure. So, some companies are choosing to join in on the market rather than continue to fight it. What we do is we advocate for sensible regulations and, sell it 21 and over, make it the right way, don't appeal to children, but ultimately, make it available to be sold at retail channel. And especially in a state like where I'm from in Kentucky, where we don't have a cannabis program yet, and so many consumers still want access to the plant. I think there's an avenue there that patients and consumers are still getting access to it. So some people have referred to it as red state weed, if you will, where they still get access to it, just in the way that maybe that they didn't intend to in the first place.
Yeah, no doubt. Certain markets have certainly propped up products in the industry, and I think this is a good segue to bring Laylee into the conversation. Being in Minneapolis, Minnesota, I would say is probably, the hottest market, certainly for low dose hemp derived THC beverages. We've seen a lot of strides in just the accessibility of these beverages. We've seen, kind of national distributors kind of now call Minnesota HQ, because they're essentially able to, ship these products anywhere to the United States. So Laylee, I want you to kind of just talk about, what you're seeing in Minnesota And then we're going to talk a little bit about, what's in store for Minnesota as they go from a rec market to as they go from a medical market to a rec market.
Yeah, so what we're seeing here in Minnesota is the continued expansion of this low-dose hemp-derived marketplace that I think in many ways we innovated in our state in 2022 when we specifically legalized and put a regulatory structure around that product category, thereby, creating an actual government-sanctioned industry for them. And I think, I see the low-dose hemp-derived market as really contributing to two major things. One is market growth and diversification, in terms of categories of products, but also the type of consumers that you are reaching with now cannabis ingredients and cannabis products. And then perhaps even the more important one is that destigmatization and that normalization of cannabis consumption in formats, again, that are much more accessible to folks who perhaps otherwise would not see themselves as regular cannabis consumers. So for those that are not as familiar with the marketplace here in Minnesota, we have low-dose hemp-derived products that are being sold not only in hemp, specialty hemp product shops, but we're also seeing a lot of these products are being manufactured by breweries. And so we're seeing them in restaurants, in liquor stores, but also in places like bowling alleys. The chalet at the place I go skiing offers it, hair salons, barber shops. We're seeing these products being served in such a wide variety of places. And that's really having implications for how our adult use market is and will continue to shape in this state.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Just the pure accessibility of these products. And not only that, you have mainstream crossovers, right? So Cub Foods, a hometown Minnesota company, has these beverages on their shelves. Total Wine now has a dedicated section for these beverages on their shelves in Minnesota, which I think is going to be, transported to other marketplaces, because now we kind of finally see this marketplace developing, and there's a lot of shifts going on in the United States with generational shifts. The push to non-elk. We've seen, big breweries, the biggest of them all, global conglomerates, start to introduce non-elk. Some of them are still kind of wavering on low THC, beverages into the market, because I do ask them that, continually. But certainly there is a groundswell happening in Minnesota that I think could really serve as, a launching point to other states, because now we're actually seeing these products are in demand. And a lot of these, there's a lot of, I think a lot of the perceptions that these beverages just couldn't exist in this market, but we're seeing monumental shifts in consumer behavior, and it's certainly there's a place for all these type of beverages, but specifically low dose THC.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're going to see here in Minnesota, and, in the case of Minnesota, we legalized the low dose as part of an overall strategy and framework for ultimately legalizing and regulating the entire plant. Now, how this shapes up in other states where, the rec market precedes the low dose market, it may shape up in other ways. But, here in Minnesota, I think what we're really seeing is folks have been now exposed to these products, have become consumers of these products, have become loyal to certain brands, especially a lot of our local Minnesota manufactured and retailed brands. And when the rec market comes and some of the same, beloved manufacturers and brands that they've been purchasing from in the low dose market now are switching over into adult use, I think we're going to see a lot of those consumers follow them. And so I think we're going to probably have one of the most destigmatized and reasonably regulated rec marketplaces as well.
Yeah, and we're going to ask you about those kind of developments. But I think another opportunity lies, is in the consumption sphere, because, there's most music venues around the country, of course, people smoke weed at concerts, but They don't have dedicated sanction places to do that, and there's a lot of concerns about smoke. But beverages, again, I feel is like there's an there's like an inroad because it is not disruptive to other people if you're just sipping, your low THC cannabis drink. So again, I feel like there's opportunities to get cannabis into these venues that have kind of been off limits for us consumers. And again, I feel like this is potentially a pathway, for growth and expansion to other products.
Absolutely. I think, and we are seeing that. We're seeing the demand for carrying these products, oftentimes coming from event venues, the wedding industry, the convention and conference industry. These are all folks that we've gotten outreach because they're specifically interested in being able to sell and to serve, especially the beverages, because they are low dose, because they are formulated and packaged in a way to be more sessionable. And we're finding, especially event venues, saying, and this is, no big surprise to all of us, that, wow, we have way fewer issues with our customers that are consuming these THC beverages than we do with folks that are consuming alcohol.
Yes, of course. All facts. Let's talk about maybe some potential partnerships, right? Because I know that there's been, and Carrie kind of brought this up, so please come back into the convo, but we've kind of seen, camps kind of align, hemp v cannabis. We've seen cannabis companies, in certain states box out hemp companies, hemp products for various reasons. But, just, thinking about all the conversations during BizCon that I heard from folks of cannabis, cannabis companies going into hemp products, lining up with cannabis products to do, kind of these mixed product SKUs. I just feel like there's tons of potential there. There's a lot of chatter about that. And maybe this kind of helps, extend some olive branches out to both sides of the industry, right? Because it is, the same plan after all.
Exactly. I think you're hitting it right on the head, which is, anytime I'm seeing these kinds of activities where you're seeing the low dose, the hemp market, and the adult use, more heavily regulated market working together to bring the entire plant more towards that regulatory treatment that the low dose stuff and the hemp is right now getting. At the end of the day, THC is THC, and in one context, it's getting a very, very different treatment than in the other one. I think that is fantastic, and I think that's where folks really should be dedicating their energies. But there is also some truth to why some folks are concerned in seeing, an adversarial lens to some of this. And we saw it here in Minnesota as well, where it becomes a problem is when you have folks operating, and especially if they're new entrants to that low dose hemp-derived space, and they're, at best, not advocating, and at worst, we see this, advocating against the legalization of the full plant, then you're just being an opportunist and taking advantage of an ingredient that, you are manufacturing at the expense of the folks that basically bought you the right in the first place. But I really here in Minnesota, where I think we have, we're the canary in the coal mine for a lot of these things, those dynamics. Certainly we had last year as we were moving through the legislation to legalize adult use. And now that we're on the other side of that, I am increasingly seeing that, the two sides here in Minnesota, like we have designed this to be a coherent framework with a logic behind it for having a low dose market and adult use market that balances the entitlements and the restrictions on either side. And so we're continuing to push for the advocacy to come together.
Yeah, and Carrie, I want you, Carrie wants you to weigh in, especially these unification efforts that are ongoing.
Yeah, and Minnesota is a great state, and the regulations and laws that they've got passed hemp and cannabis wise are just top notch. But what's interesting is that a lot of these lawmakers I deal with and regulators, they still struggle with the difference between hemp and marijuana, right? And sometimes you're starting from square one, especially on the federal level, some of the staffers that will come in. But what you also see is poorly written bills that inadvertently ban regular old hemp and CBD products. So at the end of December, we had a big lobbying effort in Ohio because of the bill, the way that bill was written was, would have inadvertently swept it in and banned CBD. And right now we're seeing it with LB 999 in Nebraska. It's the same thing. And so these regulators, I think of in Ohio, for example, the governor, he saw a Delta 8 sign on the side of the road and said, I don't like that. And so he called up somebody he knew in the legislature and said, let's put a bill in to ban this. But then they write it, and the way that, they sweeps in anything that's got above 0.001% THC. Well, now that's broad spectrum and full spectrum CBD products that have absolutely no intoxicating aspect at all that are being sold at Whole Foods and other grocery stores that are now banned. And so it's a really tricky tightrope to balance, and what Minnesota has done is amazing in that they found that way to please both parties, because I also do agree there are some bad actors in the industry that are fly by night, that are going to sell products until they get shut down, and they'll start a new LLC and try and sell products again for a few more months and get shut down. So we're advocating for and are proponents of sensible regulations, but it's just a really tricky tightrope to walk.
It certainly seems like there's a lot more chatter, though, about real potential partnerships, bringing these two camps together, or, companies going at it alone, so to speak, and really incorporating, these different types of ingredients in their product. Really, and this is kind of consumer driven. I mean, this is what consumers are asking for.
Yeah, and there's also the aspect that circuit judges and lawsuits continue to favor the hemp industry. So at a certain point you kind of got to jump on board. But you are right, it's a consumer driven thing, and there's less hassle and headache to be able to sell the products. And so now I will say, in the talks we have with MSOs about joining our organization, or just in general asking us questions on where we see the market going, they are concerned that the next farm bill, they could pour millions of dollars into a certain product line, or all right, we're going to be all in on D8, and then the law changes and now everything is gone. So there's the hesitancy to know that how long will these products stay legal is the question, the $1 million question everybody asks.
No doubt, a lot, yeah, and I think that's a good segue, because we can bring in our next panelists here. Thank you, Laylee and Carrie. Stick around for our Q&A. But I think this is a great segment to bring in Jeremy Unruh, Senior Vice President of Public and Regulatory Affairs at PharmaCann, a Chicago-based MSO. Jeremy, welcome. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be on. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. So, we were just talking about, some MSO conversations getting into the mix. Maybe if you can kind of just give me a sense of kind of how PharmaCann views the hemp space. Do you guys use, CBG, CBN, CBD in your products? How do you guys kind of view that, and also kind of just, the regulatory landscape, before I ask you about just some greater opportunities in some specific states for MSO?
Yeah. So I would have to tell you that hemp regulatory policy is not my overarching sweet spot.
Sure.
But my observation is that all of this nuance and these tightropes that we're being asked to walk, that were highlighted by the last two panelists correctly, they all cascade from that farm bill, right? And to me, the intention of the farm bill, when it was kind of developed in 2014 and then passed again and re-racked and passed again in 2018, was not to create a sector of intoxicating products. It was to create a little de minimis exception for farmers who were growing hemp, that botanically that plant can't be grown entirely void of THC, right? And so there's this little de minimis exception for farmers who are growing these products and growing these plants and making the products that flow from them. And I don't think that there was an intention by the Congress to carve out this sheaf or stable of intoxicating products that can be derived from it, that these intoxicating products are okay to be derived from hemp, but those are not. So I do think that the issues raised by the panelists are fair and correctly framed, but I think it starts with the Farm Bill and cascades down from that. So I really think that this re-racking of the Farm Bill, when it happens, hopefully in the lame duck portion of this legislative session, this congressional session, that we get some clarity there. And then the rules can fall. And then we as operators can figure out kind of where we want to be and how we want to build our partnerships. But from our perspective, like, I'm looking at New York dispensaries, and we're, driving to them, and there's an illicit shop, and there's an illicit shop, and there's an illicit shop, and it's got hemp-derived Delta 8, who's made in an industrial setting by Lord knows who and under what standards. And there's one, and there's one, and there's one. And so from our perspective, kind of on the boots on the ground, we'd like to see some clarification at high that can cascade down and tell these judges which way they should be ruling, and tell these states what the guardrails should look like to maintain the integrity of their public health and safety, as well as their cannabis marketplaces. So it's an issue to me. It kind of starts with that.
Okay. So, you brought up New York. We've been, all of us have been watching New York for, over a year now, since it opened up adult use in late December of 2022. PharmaCann was one of the, first 6 MSOs to gain this allowance to enter the adult use market. I believe it was in December. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe you guys started doing wholesale in the adult use market, and then also recently opened up sales at your retail chain. So talk a little bit about PharmaCann's journey in New York. As we talked about, a 10-year journey to get to this spot, which is interesting that you brought up. So maybe just talk a little bit about that journey, and obviously, incredible, potential market in New York, multi-billion-dollar market.
Well, it has been a journey, and I was one of a handful of people that helped start this company back about 10 years ago, and we, it was when the medical marijuana licensing sort of race started. It started in it didn't start in Illinois, but Illinois was one of the first sort of big, large scale ones where there are a lot of people competing for a lot of licenses, and then it was. If memory serves me right, I think it was like Maryland, and then it was New York, then Maryland, then like Pennsylvania phase 1, and then Ohio, and then Pennsylvania phase 2, or maybe those were reversed. But there was this domino effect of these medical markets that were having their application processes, and so we started kind of at that time, and securing that New York, one of the 5 at that time New York medical licenses, was sort of one of the first things our company actually ever did. And so I saw that from the very start. And, I remember, we were awarded our license along with the other 4 others at that time. And they added 5 more to make 10 registered organizations in New York. But we had a 6-month operational requirement. And that wasn't the same operational requirement that you saw in other states, which was, hey, have 1 plant in your cultivation center and you will be operational for purposes of complying with those timelines. Is that me? I think that when I make moves, my screen does weird things. So forgive me, everybody. But we had a 6-month operational requirement to actually have products in the dispensary. So we had to grow those plants. We had to build out the facility, grow the plants, harvest the plants, get them through quality assurance, come up with packaging and labeling. And remember, there was no flower at that time. There was
That's
only
right.
flower in the New York market in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And so we had to make an extract, a tincture, and then actually get that transported to our dispensary and in the seed sale tracking system and dispensed by a pharmacist all in 6 months. And, we get a call at the 5-month mark, and it's the governor's office saying, hey, can you move that timeline up to 5.5 months? Because the governor's got a state of the state address, and he wants to be able to tell people that there's a functioning medical marijuana market in New York. And we were like,
yeah,
what else do you want? And so we were, I see these dispensaries transitioning or opening their doors to adult use consumers, and there are lines around the block.
Mm-hmm.
And, we had that same dynamic in some of our dispensaries in other states, but it was 3 days before we first dispensed our first medical marijuana product in New York. It was the 3rd day that we were open before somebody finally came in and said,
fascinating.
hey, will you dispense me some medical marijuana? And that was how we started. And since then, we've had ups and downs with our the quasi pharmaceutical model. Like at that time, the quality assurance requirements, the labeling, the labeling window is what we call it, meaning if your product is plucked off the shelf and tested, you have to be plus or minus 10% of whatever your measure is on your label. Well, that window back in the day in New York, it was plus or minus 5%, which is smaller than the American pharmacopoeia for tolerance levels and labels. So we were kind of forced to hit the back of an arrow and then hit the back of an arrow and then hit the back of an arrow in this very crazy nascent quasi pharmaceutical regulatory structure that New York had imposed. And so, moving fast forward through those next 10 years, all of a sudden the state has to transition that quasi pharmaceutical mentality into a more traditional adult use mentality, especially where they've got a lot of the conditional cultivators growing outdoors or growing in passive greenhouse settings where there's a lot of the creepy crawlies from the ambient air coming in. And so they had to figure out how they transition from point A to point Z very, very, very rapidly. And that's created a lot of interesting dynamics here. Let me stop, and I'm sure you got a question.
Let's talk about that transition. As you now serve adult use, consumers. Let's talk about the ramp that now exists in New York.
Yeah, so I think the statute actually, when I take my PharmaCann hat off and step back and kind of look at the statute's intention and what kind of market they're trying to build, there's some observations. Like, first off, they're two-tier, they're very rigid two-tier market structure, is more reminiscent of Washington than pretty much any other market in the state. And I think that they've laid a lot of foundation behind the curtain. And when I say they, I mean the OCM, the Office of Cannabis Management, behind the curtain, that, to compare it to California, just because of the size and the scale of the transition, there's a lot of different dynamics. So they're not, it's apples to oranges, but there are a few characteristics that you can sort of draw analogies to. I think that New York is setting up a far better foundation for regulating its marketplace going forward. And so I think in, 2 or 3 years, you are going to see things better in New York than you saw in California after kind of the same period of time. The database that New York has set up for tracking true parties of interest, or basically ownership interests, to make sure that there's no crossover between those two tiers. Like I think that's a pretty robust system. And I think that's going to come back, and people are going to be, I don't want to say hamstrung, but people are going to be regulated by that, and I think there are other things that New York is doing. I think they've set up their structure so that there is a far more level playing field between, larger, more established operators like us and more nascent operators who are coming into the market now. We're limited to owning only 3 dispensaries. Everybody else in the world who qualifies for a license is also limited to only owning 3 dispensaries. Now, there's some other things. We get to be vertically integrated, but that's a function of us being grandfathered in. When they started the medical market 10 years ago, we were a forced vertical, kind of like Florida, in that only PharmaCann products could be sold in PharmaCann dispensaries because, back then the administration, the governor, didn't like weed. He was only opening the market up for for medical operators grudgingly, and because he was sort of being pushed into it. And so the notion was, well, it'll be a lot easier to regulate 5 vertically integrated, operators than it will be to set up a whole market structure of folks. So I think there are a lot of guardrails that will balance the marketplace more than people probably appreciate.
And I want to just have I want you to talk about Ohio. Voters overwhelmingly approved legalization in November, one of the highest approval rates anywhere. It was kind of an interesting ballot initiative, which also had, one other ballot issue on it, which had to do with reproductive rights. In Ohio, PharmaCann, do you guys get 3 extra or 1? I'm not sure where you guys are on that tier.
Yeah, this is, you're pointing out an important dynamic. I think the takeaway, and I would be delighted to hear Ms. O'Keefe's take on this, because she has such a phenomenal sort of cross-market view of these these regulatory structures. But like, to me, like, this is the first time there's been sort of a shift in the balance here at the state level. Like right now, if the Ohio legislature does nothing, that adult use law is going into effect, whether they like it or not, whether the governor likes it or not, whether the president of the Senate likes it or not. And so it's not about, gosh, are you going to get your half loaf of bread? Are you going to get your, your adult use initiative over the goal line? And yeah, you're going to have to take a bunch of concessions that you don't want because you got to get folks to vote for it. Here, it's already there. And so the discussion that they're having in the State House about tweaking the revenue or changing things around, or there's a more conservative, group in the Senate that has advanced a bill. Like, if you look at that bill, while there's a lot that's in that bill, that's not great. Like, it doesn't have those 3 dispensaries for incumbent cultivators, but it does have like a 90-day fast start, right? Yeah. Because they've decided that they want to be like Maryland and not like New York when it comes to the illicit market and the regulatory vacuum that tends to be created in these states when you decriminalize cannabis, but you don't set up a market structure for that. And that they've got strong guardrails around their intoxicating cannabinoids, and there's a complicated local opt-out process. So even if we don't get what's in that currently existing ballot initiative, we're still going to get good stuff, right? And so I think there's still a lot to be hashed out. I don't think we're going to see that get hashed out until after the primaries, because I don't think people are going to want to talk about their position on these bills or on weed generally. Yeah, absolutely. They get through the primaries, so everybody's kind of like white knuckled, particularly at the local level in Ohio. But they should be patient and draw a breath and kind of see how these tend to shake out in April, May-ish.
And those are great. Yeah, those are great points that you brought up, Jeremy. And obviously, there's a vocal opposition also, because the governor in Ohio, they wanted to really kind of gut, the will of the voters there almost instantly. And there's a huge advocacy campaign, where folks were calling their lawmakers, their legislature, and now it's kind of been in a standstill. And usually, a standstill, I think, is going to pretend to be better for the industry than rash actions, almost immediately after an overwhelming ballot initiative was passed. Jeremy, I'm going to go. I'm going to stay on for the Q&A. I'm going to introduce our last panelist, who's going to bring a different kind of perspective to what's happening in New York. We're going to welcome Sean McKenzie. He is a card licensee and social equity advocate. Also a member of New York for Social and Economic Equity. Sean, glad to see you here. I appreciate you waiting it out. You're gonna round it out here and end our programming here. So first of all, thanks, Sean, for being with us today.
Glad to be seen, and thank you for having me.
So Sean, I want to just talk to you about your journey in New York as a social equity advocate. We've been writing about the challenges that of social equity folks have faced for years at MJBizDaily in literally every single marketplace. No one has got it right yet. No program has got it right. Talk to me about your journey and where you stand right now.
Yeah, I think for me, it was really about creating a bridge from the community over to policy and regulations, all the things that really make a market. So shortly after MRTA, it was connecting with folks that I've known from previous lives that are in legislative, and were able to really wanted some insights of how we can make this rollout equitable, because MRTA and the intention of MRTA is a really beautiful thing. It's a great piece of legislation, but I think how you roll a market out, and I think all the folks here will agree, is sort of a completely different thing, particularly.
And MRTA, sorry to interrupt you, Sean, just for folks out there, is essentially, the legalization and regulatory law that kind of governs New York cannabis, right?
Yes. So shortly after MRTA, it was really about, educating folks on things that are happening in other markets, bringing stakeholders that we know from other markets to the table, so folks know exactly, what needs to be done. And that's even sort of the formation of OCM and such, and which I think, folks are doing a really great job of, being a listening board to the community and hearing folks out and creating, different events and things where they go around the state and and educate folks on cannabis, but also making sure that folks know what they need to do to apply and be a part of the market. I will say that in 2024, we want to strike a more positive tone because of how the end of last year ended. You know, we had a lawsuit, we had some litigation that was brought, you know, by some corporate-backed folks, both in state and out of state. And it was just very disappointing because, you know, I'm a member of New York Cannabis Retail Association, so NYCRA. And we have conversation with social equity applicants who are card applicants, which are the conditional retail licensees. And these folks were struggling for those 5 or 6 months where they were held in limbo. And, you know, you have folks that, you know, lost everything.
You know, a lot of folks are paying rent, right? They're paying rent, holding down leases, you know, trying to get logistics set up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I believe the folks at OCM have great intentions. I believe the folks that crafted Murta had great intentions, but, you know, it was just really disappointing to see that that was the course of action that was taken because so many folks were hurt in result. But this year, you know, folks are getting back, they're dusting themselves off. We're New Yorkers. We could take a punch and we can give one, and we're going to continue to see this thing rolled out, and we're going to see it through to the end.
Let's talk about, you know, where you're at in your process, you know, and how that's been so far, trying to, you know, either secure real estate or, you know, kind of just tell me kind of what you're walking through, you know, your kind of daily challenges that you're facing to open up your doors and, you know, and tell us, you know, potentially where that's going to be.
Yeah, so we're in a great place. We're currently waiting for some feedback for OCM. There's a lot of back and forth with that, and those folks, they have quite the job ahead of them. So, you know, that's kind of where we are. We have a retail location, but again, that delay really has a lot of folks trying to hold on to that retail location. Some folks lost retail location, et cetera. I'm fortunate because, you know, I come from the real estate field. I'm actually a licensed real estate agent. And I have those connections, you know, to funding, to a space. I know how to navigate those things. I mean, if you know how to do New York City real estate and operate in that, you can pretty much do anything, right? But you know, for other folks, they're not so lucky. And I think that's why it's important to have a community, right? And have associations where we can really band together and give those resources and share resources so we make sure that we all win. So right now we are in a really good place. It's a fight every single day, but we're going to keep on fighting, and we should have our doors open, you know, this year for sure.
Good to hear that. I'm happy to hear that. Please keep me posted on those developments. You know, you know, give me your outlook about New York, because we've all, you know, there's been a lot of piling on, and obviously for good reason, especially, you know, there's been some promises made by certain politicians in New York and regulators that just are, you know, have nowhere, you know, that are just haven't come to fruition, and really wide misses here. But just give me your sense, you know, obviously you're there, you're fighting the good fight. You know, are you bullish? Are you optimistic? Do you foresee things changes? You know, I think we're all craving good news in this industry, you know, because I know we're bogged down by a lot of the negativity, you know, because we're in it, you know, day in and day out.
You know what? I am optimistic because through our community, through NYCRA, you know, through all the organizations that are really fighting on the ground and the grassroots level, we're going to take the fight to Albany. You know, Albany, we're now in session. You know, as of January, the lawmakers are back. A lot of folks have to get caught up with what's been happening in the market. And that's, of course, because there's always been that educational piece when it comes to cannabis. So now we have to sort of double educate them on what's happened since the session was last, you know, they was last in session last year. So I'm optimistic because, you know, there are some real fighters out there, and we know that we have to attack it at multiple angles. Like, you know, I know there's a lot of things happening with the DASNY fund and a lot of confusion there, and some, you know, questionable things that, you know, folks want answers for, right? But that's really why advocacy is important. And I recommend any social equity applicant, whether it's, you know, in any other state, wherever else in the world, to really attack the policy, be in the know, join together. It's not a competition. It's about collaboration, right? We have to collaborate with each other. So, you know, it's very easy to get down in the mud with all the things that are happening, but that is the nature of business. You got to be willing to fight for what you want, and you got to be willing to fight for what's right. So I feel great about the things that are going to happen this year.
Good.
And you're going to hear some great news coming out this market very, very soon.
Good. I think we're all looking for that. We're all looking for good news in the industry. Sean, really appreciate you taking out time and giving your perspective on you know, your journey into the sector and what's going on in New York specifically. Kelly, I think we're going to bring everyone back, all the panelists now, and just open it up to a quick Q&A. You know, feel free, all you are all experts in your field, so let's just have kind of a free-flowing conversation if we get any questions from the audience.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. And I just want to thank everyone for bearing through weather and technical difficulties with us. We're super excited to be here and we appreciate everybody's questions. So I've divided these into a few different areas. Then the first one is markets. So Katrina Aiello, a cannabis consultant in New York, asks, how can small and mid-sized adult use cultivators and processors expand their business without retail operations getting in the way?
Oh, who's that for me?
Yeah, that's for you, Sean.
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
Katrina wants to know how small and mid-sized cultivators and processors can expand their business without retail operators getting in the way.
Well, I think it has to be a partnership, right? And we saw that with the supply chain issues that we had last year. So it's important for it to not seem like it's adversarial. We all have our different objectives and different things. There's different taxes that are getting kicked around and all the above. But at the end of the day, we have a consumer base that we need to, you know, we need to serve, right? So I think, you know, beyond the stuff that we differ on, we need to really come together with the stuff that we are together on. And I think you're going to see a lot of that this year, where you have the farmers, particularly the small farmers who have been suffering as well, you know, who definitely have a loud voice because, you know, they've had a runway in this, right? Whereas card folks are sort of new to the game. You know, let's come together. Let's figure out where we can sort of align with these things, because we want to make sure that this New York market is protected for the small businesses and the folks of the community, whether that's in the city where I am or whether that's upstate. So I believe expanding your business really comes to that collaborative effort and having that point of communication open, and not letting the things that, you know, sort of we divide on sort of be the theme and a common theme that we rest on.
Excellent points. Moving over to, we talked a lot about new markets, but Andrzej, I can't even say it, Skoniski, a marketing manager in Boston, he is wondering what the future looks like for more established recreational markets who've been legalized for a few years, and will there be a demand for dedicated spaces for on-site consumption? And Carlton Karlowski also extends that mat to Canada. He wants to know, is there a consumption lounge demand in Canada?
So I think I'll chime in first. I think it depends on the state. There are certainly a couple states that passed on-site after having initially legalized. Those include Colorado and Nevada. I believe Vermont's taking a serious look at it, and I think Connecticut has some built-in language, their initial law, to have there be a study of on-site consumption. I know there are some other states like Montana. I spoke at a legislative commission and there was no interest there. So I think it'll depend on the states. Eventually, I think we'll see it everywhere. Eventually, I think we'll see cannabis treated a lot more like alcohol and be available in a lot of other locations, but that could be quite some time.
Matt,
Yeah,
sorry.
my video is not working. So yeah, in Canada, it's also province by province, and there would be huge demand for it, I think, if it was allowed, but the provinces need to pass laws and regulations to facilitate that, and that hasn't happened yet. But in Ontario, they were examining it, and in British Columbia, they were examining it. So it could happen. It will happen in the future, but like Karen said, I think we're some time away from something like that in Canada.
I think there is at least some pretty lively markets going right now. I mean, we're a lot of us have been tracking what's going on in Las Vegas proper. We have, there is certainly some retailers that are on the verge of getting those final approvals from regulators in Nevada. I can certainly see by the end of the year, I don't think it's out of line to say there might be up to a dozen that are opened in Las Vegas, and I think Las Vegas is going to be really a really interesting test market, because hopefully they get some allowances that we just haven't seen in other states. And I certainly think that consumption lounges is certainly one of the key iterations of the industry. I think we all want a safe space to eat, consume, have fun, but again, a lot of this comes down to regulatory restrictions. And hopefully we see these gains in Las Vegas. Where I'm at in Los Angeles, West Hollywood has kind of been, a leader in this space, but again, there are new consumption lounges opening up in West Hollywood, on Santa Monica Boulevard, and basically a 2-mile stretch, you have like 5 or 6 consumption lounges. So this kind of dynamic just does not exist really anywhere in the United States. And hopefully, we do get some, movement in this space as this year kind of progresses. And I think some certain markets are ripe for that, but not enough, certainly. And, of course, there's business model concerns, right? Because, I think that still needs to be worked out, especially given all the business challenges that, are facing industry operators.
Yeah, I'll chime in one more time. There also, when I was looking at the data for Montana, the states that allow on-site consumption, in some cases, there are like 1 or 2 in the entire state. I think Michigan and Illinois, a lot of the regulations are so onerous that it's just not a profitable business model. I believe the first that ever opened in West Hollywood, where I lived for 11.5 years, shut down because it just, everything they had to do to comply was really, really challenging. And then people sat there for hours and didn't move out of the table. I heard that in Nevada, they require, I think you need 1.2 million to open up. The HVAC machines they require are super, super, super onerous, more so than for places that allow cigarettes. So you have that challenge too, that in some cases, they're unfortunately not profitable business models because of the rules.
Makes sense. Laylee, this one is for you, also from Charlton. How was Minnesota and North Dakota dealing with the cities on the state lines and their laws? Are the states seeing more cannabis offenses happening in North Dakota state line cities?
Seems to be.
You might have a glitch.
Laylee, are you there?
Let's hop on to the next question.
Well, I know Kelly, at least I know that at least in, Missouri, when Missouri went rec, I know that, some major operators there, some of the bigger ones, actually worked with legislatures in talking to lawmakers in neighboring Kansas, because Kansas, of course, has neither, and they actually have some pretty strict cannabis laws on the books to try to ease this situation of folks going, because this is what we know this is happening when new rec markets open. Folks, if you're getting a better deal in your neighboring state and it's a 20-minute drive, 30-minute drive, you're going to go get weed there, especially when now you have all these extra product choices. So I know at least in some certain examples, operators have been trying to work with neighboring states that don't have these similar programs in place and work on, decriminalization bills, something along those lines, if they're not nearly ready to, establish any type of program.
Sorry, Laylee.
Am I back?
You lost me for a second.
Oh, there we go.
We can hear you now.
Sorry, for some reason. Of course, the internet chooses to be unstable at the most inconvenient time. Yeah. If I heard you correct, the question was just about the issue of border states and how we're dealing with that here in Minnesota. I'm not aware of any formalized conversations that have been happening between the local governments or the legislators and folks across the border. Certainly it is, from my perspective, been an issue that the press has asked about even more so than the policymakers have. I've been getting more calls about that from press in Wisconsin than we've been getting outreach from policymakers concerned about the same issue. So my hope is that the fact that folks in our bordering states will have access to products here in Minnesota hopefully has a liberalizing effect on those states' attitudes and future policy towards cannabis.
Awesome, thank you. Matt, I'm not sure if you or Karen can weigh in on this, but Elena from the Endocan brand is asking what's happening in Asia and Africa.
And well, it depends what we're talking about exactly. Maybe I can just speak to medical marijuana. In Asia, you have Thailand, and then in Africa, you have a number of countries that legalized medical marijuana, mostly for export purposes. And that's been a big problem because there aren't meaningful import markets. So I'm going to estimate the total import-export internationally is probably in the $500 million range. In Canada was about $170 million of that. So it's a meaningful amount of money, but it's not a huge amount of money, right? Like we're not talking billions of dollars. So you have hundreds of businesses trying to compete for that $500 million in import-export. So it's super competitive. It's very hard to get into. In Asia, you have just Thailand really, and Thailand has been a similar situation to New York, kind of. New York on steroids, maybe. So they legalized. It's a case study in legalizing cannabis, but then not having sufficient regulatory and enforcement controls to enforce that law and to have regulations to make the industry functional. So essentially, they legalized cannabis, and then a large percentage of the businesses that opened ended up being illegal, essentially. So that's basically all I got.
Thank you. Karen.
I'll mention, even though they're part of the US, they are Pacific Islands. So Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands have both legalized adult use cannabis too.
Wow. Thank you for
and our markets set up, Karen. I mean, what does that look like in Guam?
That's my understanding, but in the Northern Mariana Islands, I was more involved during the legalization push. There's only about 50,000 people total there, so I believe it's up and running, but I haven't checked completely.
Okay.
And I think Japan is also moving on medical cannabis. I believe.
Yeah. I've heard that.
Well, and yeah, Japan, South Korea. I think in most of Asia, especially East Asia, you're going to have pharmaceutical medical cannabinoids. So it's not going to be a medical marijuana market probably ever.
Thank you, guys. Our next section of questions revolve around hemp and CBD markets. So Carrie, if you could field this one. Bailey Conger is an energy underwriter at RB Jones, and she asked, do you see the Farm Bill being renewed with a more clearly defined legal status for hemp and CBD?
Yeah, right now, is my internet okay?
Yeah,
I had the same problem. It's right when I try to talk, it cuts out. Yeah, right now our best guess is it's going to stay the same, honestly. And those are the conversations we've been having with Senate and House leadership. Is that it won't be defined, much to the chagrin, I think, of Jeremy and many other folks, because we do agree that having worked on that bill, that the intention at the time was not to legalize these products. Our big push was it's rope, not dope, right? And we're pushing for these farmers and particularly here in Kentucky, we had a lot of tobacco farmers that switched over to hemp. So right now, our best guess and what we're advocating for is that hemp's going to stay the same definition wise.
Well, that leads to another question with Greg Holtzman. He wants to know, what about THCA? What do you see for the future?
Yeah, and I called my my boss before this too. I was like, I want to make sure we're on the same page about THCA flower if we want to jump on this thing. So because it's crazy, it really is. Now, so there's the company line that I'll say that we're supportive of it, and that we want farmers to be able to have access to the hemp plan, and there are so many businesses right now that are benefiting from it, and there's so many states where folks are selling it, and it's deemed illegal, and as long as they stay compliant with it, then they can sell that product. My personal feeling is, if I was running a business, I wouldn't go near it at all. And I know there's a testing issue where the way that a law enforcement or a police department, if they do confiscate the flower, they might test it, and it might inadvertently spike during that testing process. So they could take a product that was legal and through that testing process inadvertently make it illegal. I'm not a lab scientist, but that's my understanding of one of the complexities of the THCA flower market. There's companies, and I know Tennessee is a state right now that THCA flower is really prominent and being sold everywhere, and there's a bill and regulations being considered that would eliminate it. So I think if you're a business and you feel comfortable selling it and your lawyer told you, more power to you, but just I'm more conservative on that, and so but it's, again, in a word, it's crazy.
Thank you. This next question I'm going to open up to, anybody who has an opinion. Ethan Turner, he's a Deputy Attorney General for the California Department of Justice, and he wants to know if y'all think there will be conflict and competition between policy advocates for hemp, especially intoxicating hemp, and cannabis advocates, and specifically, will purveyors of intoxicating hemp products resist being brought into the regulated cannabis and marijuana markets where they have to compete on the same level under the same rules?
We've definitely seen that already. In the Maryland legislation, the legalization push, there was a certain threshold of THC of any kind, I believe, that would be allowed and would have to be included in, categorized as cannabis, sold as cannabis. And hemp products could have lower than that with rules, and I believe the same regulatory agency. There was a lot of opposition there. In Hawaii, the Attorney General has come up with a plan for legalization that's very detailed. There's been a lot of opposition from the hemp industry about how it would affect them as well. Lately, can probably speak a lot to Minnesota's debate there. So yes, I think there will be. There certainly are some within the hemp industry that support some reforms. I think probably across the board, some in the hemp industry support age gating and other restrictions, but there certainly is some conflict there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something we've seen play out in Minnesota, and I anticipate we will continue to see playing out, which is that the folks that, especially before we put in place any kind of regulatory framework, state regulatory framework for the low dose stuff, the fact that we even imposed age limits or, packaging requirements or started taxing this stuff, all of a sudden that felt very oppressive to a subset of folks that were operating in that hemp space. And, they saw the folks pushing for legalization of adult use as sort of being the enemy. Why are you making us, have to pay the cost to sustain your adult use program? For those of us that come out of the marijuana advocacy space, though, for us, this is not just an issue of commerce. This is an issue of social justice. It is an issue of correcting a fundamental flaw in public policy that picked winners and losers and imposed disparate barriers to being successful in this industry on folks. And so while, as I stated earlier, my hope is that the direction things go in is that hemp and how it normalizes things helps pull adult use policy more in that direction of opening it up, democratizing it, making it accessible. The notion of the fact that, the Farm Bill came around when it did, or your interest has been in hemp, and now you shouldn't be taxed for THCA, but somebody who's been on the adult use side, perhaps somebody from the legacy market looking to now transition, and that these put you in different camps. I mean, yeah, I guess it does put you in different camps, but it's on the basis of ethics more so than anything else.
Thank you. Our next question is about sustainability. This is from Twana Aiken. She's an industry affairs senior manager at National Propane Gas Association. And she wants to know, are we going to see a bigger push for sustainable practices and ESG reporting, like sustainable material sourcing, et cetera, with a federal push to move sectors to alternative fuel sources? What can we expect with this industry? Is that any, or Matt, have you seen anything in your research?
Well, I just I can give you the Canadian perspective, who we have legalized nationally. And so could it look like that in the US when you do legalize nationally? Maybe, I don't know. But so in Canada, we legalized, and our government has they've really prioritized sustainability, but not in the cannabis industry. So there's no specific rules, for example, on cannabis wastes. There's no specific rules on emissions from cannabis cultivation. There's no ESG reporting requirements. I think Canopy Growth is the only company in Canada that has an ESG report, though I could be wrong. They do. Canopy definitely has an ESG report. Anyway, my point is that after we legalized federally, we didn't really embark on any kind of sustainability model for the cannabis industry.
I think one of the few marketplaces that even has, any type of laws. I know Vermont has banned plastic packaging for products, but there is a lot of waivers that operators can still access. So I think that's a case study kind of under development, because we know that most industries produce an incredible amount of waste, but the regulations, particularly in cannabis, with plastic packaging, labeling, which means you're forced to put on all these labels on a package, which means that the package has to be this big to actually read all these labels. And then now you have this child protections that are placed in a lot of these markets where you have to walk out of the store with this literally gigantic plastic bag for a little vape. So I think that hopefully Vermont serves as a template. And I get, it's still early days in Vermont, and we definitely need to do a catch up with Vermont to see how that is actually working in the field. But certainly we need that template because our industry just produces so much waste.
Thank you. This last question, I'm hoping Jeremy and Sean might have some insights on, but they're wondering, do you have any insight into social media marketing and when the social media giants will open up to the realization that cannabis is legal in almost half of America and all of Canada? And how can we navigate all these challenges with really trying to sell a legal product and make a living with all the restrictions?
So I can jump in really quickly. So we know X, formerly known as Twitter, right? They loosened their restrictions. So they're one of the first social media platforms to actually give a landing place for cannabis. And all the other folks, they're lagging behind. We have to do all these really interesting, distortions of words and images, even to just get past some of their safeguards. So I think, again, it's with everything else. There's still a stigma there, right? And we need to educate the folks. I mean, from the community level onwards up to the executive and the boardroom level, there are a lot of folks that still see this as the devil's lettuce, right? And a little bit of that reefer madness still happening. So I think it's really about creative marketing on the ground level, community events, different things like that. Which I think, as a card licensee and a native New Yorker, that's where we have a real huge advantage because we have these ties to the community, right? And I think it's the same thing for the farmers upstate, right? You have ties to your community. Word of mouth is still a big thing, right? There was a world where social media and marketing didn't exist, and the word did get out there. So we have to just get really creative, as we all have been, over the years, to really get the word out there, but also alongside that, make sure that education is happening so we can, thaw the ice a bit. But it's going to take a lot of work from the collective community.
Jeremy, do you have any experience on your end?
Yeah, I would just say that, we all, those of us here, and we mostly all live in cannabis or live in the cannabis world and space. And so we tend to forget, even though we are constantly reminded with every single one of the tasks we undertake, regardless of what those tasks are, that there is still a legal disconnect between state sanctioned cannabis and federally illegal cannabis. And these big, marketing, advertising, social media companies are some of the biggest companies in the United States. And so they don't want to get hamstrung. And, they don't take it any further than, well, it's illegal at the federal level. I guess we can't put out messaging on it. And we all know that those risks are merely perception because nobody's the Federal Trade Commission is not fast roping out of helicopters down into, Meta's Instagram, headquarters to stop the presses and keep them from messaging on cannabis, right? We know that doesn't happen, but the way these big companies make decisions is pretty, it's regressive, but it's not irrational. And so I just think we have to keep chipping away. And as people get older and move out and young people get in and make the decisions at these companies, if there is no resolution of the state-federal legal disconnect in the shorter term, these cooler minds will ultimately prevail, I think, over time. But it's going to take a long time. And yeah, it's just like my colleague said, you just got to find the workarounds.
Absolutely. We definitely deal with that here at MJBiz, and shout out to LinkedIn for us being able to be live on their platform here today. We've had a lot of success there, but we've seen it as well. And, appreciate everybody's efforts and creativity. Chris, do you have any final thoughts or questions?
No, I just want to thank everyone for joining the panel. You guys are fantastic. We applaud you for fighting the good fight out there, and just really appreciative for your time and all the expertise that you guys brought here to the table.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we look forward to continuing the conversation, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Take care.
Bye.